The kingdom of Alindra rested in the middle of wide green lands and shining rivers. Tall towers reached up to the sky, and its people lived in peace for many years under Queen Leora's rule. She was young but wise, known for her kindness as much as her courage. Her father had built the kingdom, and now it was her duty to keep it safe. Yet peace never lasted forever. To the north were restless rulers who looked with envy at Alindra's fertile lands. To the south lived merchants who would trade smiles one day and shut their gates the next. Her council often spoke of danger and alliance. They said she must marry a strong man, great lord or brave general, who could command armies and strike fear into any who wished the kingdom harm. But Queen Leora did not wish for a man who sought her crown. She wished for honesty, gentleness, and peace of mind. Her advisors shook their heads when she told them so. They said no king had ever ruled only by heart. She smiled when they said that, thinking perhaps that is why kingdoms fall. Many suitors came to her court. They brought gold, jewels, and promises. One man brought rare spices, another a golden sword. All came with proud speeches and long bows. Leora listened, thanked them, and sent them home. She was tired of grand words. Then one day, while walking in the royal garden, she met a man she did not know. He was sitting under an apple tree, quietly fixing a piece of broken bench wood. His clothes were plain, his hands rough from work. His brown hair was touched by sun and wind, and when he looked up, his eyes were calm, deep, and kind. He stood at once, surprised to see her, and bowed clumsily. "I am sorry, my lady," he said. "The gardener asked me to mend this bench. It did not seem right, broken in such a beautiful place." Leora watched him, curious. "What is your name?" "Daniel Hale," he answered softly. "And you are a carpenter?" "I was," he said. "I help where I can." She smiled at that. "Then you help well. The bench will grow old before it breaks again." He gave a quiet laugh, one that sounded honest and free of fear. She left soon after, but the calm in his eyes stayed in her mind all that night. The next day she went out again, this time without her guards. Daniel was tending the roses. They talked about small things, the weather, the flowers, the markets. He spoke little of himself, but each word seemed carefully chosen without trying to impress. When he looked at her, he did not see the crown. He saw only a person speaking to him. Days turned into weeks, and their paths crossed often. Whispers began to travel through the palace halls, talk of the queen and the quiet man in the gardens. Her council grew worried. They warned her. A queen must marry power. This man is simple and unknown. How will he protect the throne? Still, Leora's heart had decided. She announced her choice before them all. The council fell silent in disbelief. The nobles bowed stiffly, hiding their anger. The people, simple folk who had no care for noble names, cheered. They saw how Daniel worked among them, fixed their broken tools, and spoke with respect to even the youngest servant. To them, he was the kind of strength that lasted. The wedding was simple, but beautiful. No golden carriages, no mists of perfume, only bright banners, music, and laughter across the valley. Leora wore silver, Daniel plain white cloth. When he took her hand, there was no hesitation, no sign of nervousness, only quiet promise. Yet not everyone shared their joy. Some lords muttered that the queen had lost her sense. "How can such a man know of ruling?" they whispered. "He is only a craftsman. What will happen when war comes?" Leora paid them no mind, but sometimes when she walked the halls alone, she wondered. Daniel seemed content to stay in the background. He still spent hours among the gardens or with the palace guards, teaching them patience more than swordplay. He never acted as if he owned the crown, and never asked for power. It was a strange peace, but also a mystery. One evening, while the moon rose above the city towers, Leora found him sitting again under the apple tree where they first met. She asked softly, "Do you ever wish for more? For fame, for command, for the respect the nobles deny you?" He smiled without looking up. "I wish only for quiet things," he said, "and they are the hardest to keep." She did not know what he meant, but something in his tone felt deep. She sat beside him, resting her hand in his. She thought she saw a flash of light in his eyes, not from the moon, but something older. hidden far within. She blinked and it was gone. That night, as she returned to her palace, she thought, "He carries something I don't yet understand." And so began a story that would change the world of Alindra forever. The days after the royal wedding were quiet and filled with simple peace. The people of Alindra grew to love Queen Leora and Daniel. They said the kingdom had found not only a wise ruler, but also a true heart beside her. The queen's laughter returned to the palace halls, and for a time it felt as if no trouble would ever come again. Daniel continued to live as he always had. He rose early and walked through the gardens, speaking kindly to the gardeners and guards. He helped mend the courtyard stairs when they cracked, and taught the stable boys how to shoe a horse correctly. He never ordered anyone around, but oddly people began to listen to him. His calm voice and patient way made others want to follow. The councils still kept their distance. Lord Branton, the Queen's chief advisor, muttered often that a palace needed more than a craftsman's hands. We warned the Queen that peace would not last, that the North was strengthening its army and building iron war machines. Leora listened carefully but answered with calm, "We will be ready when the time comes." Daniel never joined these meetings unless Leora asked. When she did, he stayed silent for most of it, his eyes studying the faces in the room more than the map spread on the table. Once when a young captain snapped angrily about the coming threat, Daniel said quietly, "A sword drawn too quickly is often turned the wrong way." The room fell silent. The captain flushed with pride and sat down again. Rumors about Daniel spread outside the palace as well. Some said he was a lost prince. Others whispered that he had strange powers, for how else could the Queen have chosen him? Old women in the markets made signs of respect as he passed. Children followed him to the edge of the streets just to see him smile. The nobles grew uneasy, for they could not understand what kind of man gained love without seeking it. One evening, as clouds gathered over the distant hills, Daniel stood on the high tower balcony with Queen Leora. The sky glowed red where the sun met the horizon. She asked, "Do you think peace will stay?" "No peace stays forever," he replied, "but how we guard it decides what follows." There was weight in his words that she could not explain. Sometimes she felt he carried memories far older than his years, as if he had lived more than one life already. He never spoke of his past. Not once did he tell her where he had come from, not even what led him to Alindra. He simply said, "I wandered until I found a place worth staying for." Leora accepted that answer, though curiosity tugged at her heart. She had seen him heal a wounded bird with his bare hands, pressing gently until the tiny thing fluttered up and flew away again. She had seen a broken gate lift on its own as he touched it. He made it look like chance, and maybe that was how it was, but deep down she wondered. Months passed, and the calm air around the capital began to change. Farmers spoke of strange lights on the northern border, shadows moving through the forest. Messengers brought news of a vast army that marched closer every week. Iron machines rolled over the hills, crushing everything beneath them. Their leader demanded Alindra's surrender. The council begged the Queen to prepare for war. Supplies were gathered, walls repaired, and weapons forged. Daniel was not seen much during these days. He spent long hours alone beyond the city walls, walking among the fields. When he returned, soil clung to his boots, and quiet purpose burned in his eyes. One morning, as soldiers prepared defenses, Daniel came into the Queen's chambers. His expression was calm, but his voice carried strength. "The enemy will reach us soon," he said. "Promise me something." She looked at him with worry. "What is it?" "When the fighting begins, do not fear what you see." "What do you mean?" she asked. He was silent for a moment. "Sometimes truth looks like madness before it is understood." Then he turned and left, leaving her speechless. That night, she could not sleep. Outside, thunder grew on the horizon, though the skies were clear. The next morning, the first wave of attack began. The enemy forces marched through the mountain pass with roaring machines and flashing blades. Alindra's soldiers fought bravely, but their numbers were too few. Leora stood on the tower balcony, watching the smoke rise from the valley. Her heart pounded with fear and helplessness. Then she noticed something strange. The wind shifted all at once, sweeping through the city like a living thing. The rivers near the walls began to glow faintly, as though reflecting some hidden light. The soldiers in the courtyard looked up in confusion. And in the center of it all stood Daniel, no weapon in his hands, his cloak billowing in the rising wind. The Queen gripped the railing, afraid to breathe. She realized, deep inside, that this was the moment he had warned her about. The humble man she had married was about to reveal the truth that would change everything she had ever believed. The morning of the battle began with heavy clouds hanging over Alindra. The city, which had once been bright with music and songs, now echoed with shouts and the sound of moving troops. The enemy had crossed the river, and their iron machines were grinding closer to the gates. Queen Leora stood in her tower, her hands trembling as she watched smoke rise in the distance. Her guards rushed to her, calling for orders. At the same time, Daniel walked calmly through the courtyard below. He wore no armor, no crown, only simple clothes that moved in the wind. Soldiers looked at him in confusion. Some called out to him, asking him to take shelter, but he did not answer. He kept walking until he reached the open field between the palace and the city walls. The enemy army appeared like a dark sea. Rows of soldiers marched forward, their weapons shining cold in the weak light. The ground shook under their iron machines. The sound was deafening. The people of Alindra hid behind their closed doors, whispering prayers. On the balcony above, Leora gripped the rail and called out his name, but Daniel did not look back. He stopped in the middle of the open field, lifted his eyes to the sky, and took a slow, deep breath. The air moved strangely around him, bending the grass even though there was no strong wind. His calm face showed no fear, no anger, only quiet purpose. The enemy commander raised his hand, ready to give the order to attack. Then Daniel spoke. His voice was soft but carried across the entire valley. "This land is not yours to take," he said. "Leave it and remember the mercy you were offered." The commander laughed. The machines began to move again. But then the ground started to tremble. It began as a low hum and grew to a deep rumble. Stones cracked, birds fled from the trees. The soldiers faltered. Daniel lowered his hand to the ground, and the earth responded as if alive. Roots broke through the soil, twisting and rising like giant snakes.
Else.
They wound around the wheels of the enemy machines, pulling them down into the earth. Men shouted and dropped their weapons in terror. The wind picked up, circling Daniel as though protecting him. From the palace balcony, Leora watched with wide eyes. It was not possible, and yet she was seeing it. Daniel raised both arms, and the air shimmered. At a river near the city gates rose higher, spilling over its banks, washing away the invaders who tried to cross. No fire, no man-made weapon could match what was happening before her eyes. The soldiers of Alindra stood frozen for a moment, too stunned to move. Then one by one they began to cheer. They fought with new strength, defending what was left of the city's walls, while Daniel's power turned the enemy's might to dust.
Us.
The battle raged from sunrise to sunset. Every path the invaders took ended in confusion. Wheels snapped, ladders broke, and even arrows lost their flight. By evening, the northern army retreated in full fear, leaving behind their broken machines and cries of defeat. The ground shook one last time, and then fell still. When the final echo faded, Daniel lowered his arms. The wind quieted around him. The field that had been torn and scarred was now strangely calm. He turned back toward the palace, walking slowly as though each step cost him great strength. His face was pale, but his eyes still carried that same steady calm. Queen Leora ran down from the tower and met him in the courtyard. She looked at him with awe, her mind struggling to understand what she had seen. "Daniel," she whispered, "what are you?" He took her hand gently, his voice tired but kind. "I am what the world once needed and forgot," he said. "I was meant to keep balance, to guard when the land called for help, but I never wished for this power to decide peace. I wished only for peace itself." Leora felt tears on her face, though she did not know when they had begun to fall. Around them, soldiers knelt in respect, murmuring his name like a prayer. "You have saved us," she said softly. He shook his head. "I only reminded the world of its strength. The earth, the air, the hearts of your people they were waiting to rise again. Merely gave them voice." For a long time they stood together as the sun set behind the hills. The sky turned golden and then quiet blue. The people of Alindra came out of their homes, bowing to Daniel as he passed, their faces filled with wonder. That night, when he finally rested, Leora watched over him. She knew nothing would ever be the same. The man she had married, the quiet craftsman who mended benches and smiled in the gardens, had changed the fate of kingdoms. Yet when she looked at him sleeping peacefully, she knew he was still the same man who had once picked up broken wood because it felt wrong to leave it in ruins. And in her heart she understood that his greatest power was not the storm he commanded, but the stillness he carried within. Days had passed since the battle ended, yet the city of Alindra still carried the memory of that strange and powerful day. The people spoke Daniel's name with respect and wonder. Children told each other stories about how he stopped the great army with nothing but his bare hands. Farmers left gifts of food at the palace gates, believing he had saved their crops as well as their lives. The queen's name was praised across the valleys, but everyone knew it was Daniel who had turned the tide of war. Inside the palace, however, peace was mixed with uneasiness. The lords and nobles did not know what to make of him. They bowed when he entered, but fear lived behind their polite smiles. Some whispered that he was not truly human, that he must have made secret deals with powers beyond their world. Others said he had come only to claim the throne when the time was right. Yet when Daniel walked among them, all their whispers turned silent. His calm presence seemed to settle even the wildest thoughts. Queen Leora saw how these fears grew, and they troubled her. She knew Daniel's heart. She had seen his kindness, his patience, and his gentleness. But she also knew he had changed. He spoke little now, often standing for hours at the balcony, his eyes on the horizon, as if listening to something far away. At night, he walked beyond the walls, where the city fields met the forest, returning only when the sky began to glow with dawn. One evening, when the halls had grown quiet, Leora found him there again. The moonlight touched his face, showing lines of weariness that had not been there before. "You avoid the court," she said softly. "The people crave to see the man who saved them. They want to thank you." Daniel looked at her with gentle eyes. "They do not need to thank me," he said. "What I did was not meant to frighten or impress. It was only to protect what should never have been attacked. The land itself rose to defend them. But you were the one who called it," she said. "No one else could have done it." He turned his gaze to the stars. "Perhaps it was not I who called. Perhaps it was the land calling through me." Leora stepped closer, her voice low. "You speak as if you are fading away from this world. Tell me what is happening to you." He hesitated, then took her hand. "Every gift has a cost," he said. "Wait. The more one uses it, the more it binds the soul to its purpose. Oh. In every age, when the world begins to fall into chaos, someone must stand to restore balance. Now that balance has returned, my time here grows thin." Her heart tightened. "So you will leave me?" "I do not wish to," he whispered. "But if I stay longer than I should, this peace may not last. Power must sleep again, or it begins to shape the world instead of serving it." She wanted to argue, to hold him, to demand that he stay, but the truth in his eyes stopped her. Ouch. She could not chain him to one life when he belonged to something greater. Still, tears filled her eyes, and he brushed them away with his thumb. The next day, the city celebrated its victory with a feast. Banners waved, and music filled the streets. Smiles returned to faces that had once known only fear. Daniel stood beside Queen Leora at the palace gates as her people came forward to greet them. He smiled and bowed, speaking simple words to each person. To the children, he told small jokes. To the older folk, he gave gentle nods and thanks. But behind his peaceful manner, Leora could feel the distance growing stronger. He was slipping away little by little. When the celebration ended and the moon rose high, he met Leora again in the palace garden. Oh. They walked along the quiet path lined with roses. The sweet scent filled the air. "Do you remember the first time we met?" he asked. "You wore no crown that day. Yeah, you looked like a young woman, lost in thought." "I remember," she said, smiling through her sadness. "You were mending a broken bench." He stopped and looked at her. "I would mend 1,000 more just to meet you again." She pressed his hand. "And I would walk the same gardens just to find you waiting there." For a long time they stood under the stars. The air grew cool, and the night silent around them. Then Daniel said, "When dawn comes, I will go to the border where the battle took place. Something calls me there. Do not follow me until the sun rises fully." Leora felt fear again, not the fear of battle, but the fear of loss. Oh. She wanted to stop him, but she knew deep inside that this was his path. She nodded slowly. That night she could not sleep. She wandered through the halls, hearing faint echoes of laughter from the feast earlier. When the first light of morning touched the sky, she ran to the balcony. Far away, near the edge of the valley, she saw a figure standing alone. The wind lifted his cloak like wings. For a moment the light around him grew bright as if the sun itself bowed in farewell. Then, before her tears could fall, the light faded and he was gone. She stood there, silently, the wind playing through her hair. The Queen of Alindra knew that though he had vanished, everything he had been still lived around her in the calm rivers, the strong trees, and the quiet courage of her people. The morning after Daniel vanished, the city of Alindra felt strangely still. The people woke expecting another bright day of peace, but something in the air had changed. The wind carried a quiet memory, and the birds that usually sang from the palace gardens were silent. Queen Leora stood on the balcony, her heart heavy, looking toward the hills where she had last seen him. The light of dawn painted the sky in soft gold, but all she could feel was the emptiness he left behind. The council came that morning, asking where Daniel had gone. She gave them no answer, only said he had gone to ensure the land's safety. They bowed and left her in silence, sensing it was not the time to press for more. Only later did the lords and nobles realize that Alindra's victory had not made her proud. The queen looked as if she carried both joy and sorrow. She ruled kindly as always, but her smile had a trace of something unspoken. As the weeks turned to months, the kingdom flourished again. No fires burned in the fields, no enemy threatened their borders. Trade returned to the roads, laughter filled the markets, and children played in the streets. The people began to believe that Alindra was now blessed forever. They said Daniel's spirit watched over them, guarding from the unseen corners of the world. Leora found comfort in that thought. Every evening she walked through the gardens, where she and Daniel had spoken many times. The roses bloomed brighter that year, as if touched by unseen hands. When she sat on the old bench that Daniel had once mended, she could almost imagine him beside her, quiet and steady as before. One night, while she was walking alone by the river outside the city walls, a faint glow appeared on the water's surface. The wind whispered softly through the reeds. She stopped and looked closer. The glow grew brighter, forming gentle ripples that spread across the calm river. Then she heard his voice, soft, almost carried by the breeze. "You kept your promise," the voice said. Earthcaught, she whispered his name. The light flickered, and for a moment she saw his outline in the reflection of familiar shape, blurred by the water and light. He seemed to smile, and then the image faded, leaving only the moon and her own reflection. Leora stood there for a long time, her hand pressed to her chest. She knew she had not imagined it. Daniel had left the world, but his presence was not gone. He had become part of the land he loved, watching quietly from everywhere and nowhere. As years passed, Alindra entered a golden age. The farms yielded rich harvests, the rivers stayed clear, and no invaders dared to threaten them again. People told stories to their children about the humble man who became a guardian of the kingdom. Every family had their own version. Some stories said he was a spirit of the earth, others said he was a man chosen by fate. All agreed on one thing: he had loved their queen more than his own life. Leora grew older, but the grace of her youth stayed with her. She ruled with wisdom, guided by the peace Daniel had sacrificed for. When her council argued, she remembered his calm words and used patience instead of pride. When fear threatened her people, she reminded them that courage did not always roar. And when she stood on her balcony at night, she spoke softly into the wind, knowing somehow he could still hear her. One spring morning many years later, when the first blossoms opened on the apple trees, the queen walked again to the old bench in the garden. The years had slowed her steps, but her eyes still carried the same light. She sat quietly, listening to the rustle of leaves. The air was warm, and for a moment, she thought she felt a familiar hand brush hers light as air, gentle and real. She smiled without fear. "Everything you built still lives," she whispered. "Your peace remains." The wind answered by stirring the branches, and a single flower fell into her lap. She held it close, the petals soft against her fingers, and looked up at the sky. When the sun set that evening, the palace bells rang softly, not in mourning, but in remembrance. The people said their queen had gone to join the one she loved, walking together beyond the hills where the sky met the earth. Some said that on clear nights they could still see two figures standing at the edge of the valley, one in silver light and one in shadow, watching over Alindra. The stories never faded. Even when new generations filled the land, they still spoke of the queen who married a humble man and discovered a guardian in her garden. They taught their children that true strength did not always come from crowns or weapons, but from hearts that stayed kind even in the greatest storm. And somewhere beyond the reach of time, where peace has no end, Daniel and Leora walked side by side, their love forever woven into the wind and the soil of Alindroth, the heart of a kingdom that never forgot what it meant to be truly human.